Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. Today, Kenji and I are going to answer a question we get very, very commonly, which is how to decide when you want to sell your rental property. And so, what will happen is we'll have a lot of students who are maybe accidental landlords who will say, come into Zero to Freedom, our course, and say, hey, how should I decide if I should sell this property? How do we even know it's a good deal? Or how do you make this decision? Or sometimes we'll have people who have been in our community for a couple of years. They own a number of properties. They're looking at scaling up and they ask us the same question, which properties should I sell? How do I know when I should sell one property versus another? And so we actually have a very framework that we think through when we're thinking about selling. And we're going to talk about that today. And we're going to walk you through that framework of ours. So the number one first thing we think about is cash on cash return. And this won't be a surprise to a lot of you who have been listening to us for a long time, but we're really thinking about these properties as investments. And so what we want to know is how is it returning the cash? So if we put a certain amount of money into a property to purchase it, to rehab it, what return is it giving us on the cash that we put in that first year or maybe even subsequent years? What return is it giving us on our investment? Is it giving us a 5% cash on cash return, 10%? We actually even have properties up to 40% cash on cash return. You can bet that we're probably never selling those properties, right? But if we're looking across our portfolio and we're looking at the cash on cash return and the range, if we're seeing some lower performance that are not to the cash on cash return that we'd like them to be, and we can't see a path to be able to get them there, those are going to be the properties that we're more likely to trade if we come across another really great deal or we're thinking about selling a property.
I think this is where it's really helpful to either have a portfolio view if you have a portfolio of properties, or to be able to compare with how other people are performing in terms of their properties. So in terms of the portfolio view, one thing that we do is we look at our entire portfolio and we see the cash on cash return and we compare them and we say, okay, which one of these is underperforming? Which one of these do we just foresee it's not going to improve? And there's not really many ways for us to improve the cash on cash. In those situations, those are probably the ones that we're going to sell first. And then also, I think it's important if you don't have a portfolio, you just have one or a few properties. This is where it's really helpful to be able to compare how your property is performing compared to other people. And when you hear that other people are getting, 15%, 20%, 40% cash on cash return, you go, maybe I can do better. And when you look around and you say, okay, I can do better, this is when you want to think about moving that property.
Yeah, we see this a lot with accidental landlords who come into our program because they're saying to themselves, okay, I bought this property. I really didn't know anything about investments. A lot of people buy properties thinking that it's going to appreciate and that's how they make money. So people will come into our community and they'll say, I want to assess the cash on cash return of this property that I purchased, 5 years ago. And they're pretty shocked when they go in and they look at that cash on cash return and they realize they're not really getting much bang for their buck. And that makes the decision really, really easy if they're surrounded by a community who are running cash on cash calculators and they're seeing what's possible with newer properties or with new property. Then they say to themselves, okay, the cash on cash return that I'm getting on my money right now is so much lower than I could be getting. And that's really helps people decide faster to be able to trade up their property and go buy something else. The next thing we think about is the work required for the property. So if you have a property and it has decent cash on cash return, let's say it's like 10% cash on cash return, and you have another property that has 10% cash on cash return, but one requires so much time because things are always breaking down, because the tenants are causing issues, because maybe the neighborhood isn't going very great. So you've got people trash outside or landscaping issues. Those are the properties also when you're looking across your portfolio that you're like, you know what, this is taking so much of my time because your time has value too. And so we actually see people do this with short-term rentals sometimes is they'll buy a short-term rental, the cash on cash will be okay, but the amount of time that it's taking them, they're like, you know what, I could actually switch, maybe make it a midterm rental or maybe even get rid of it and just get a long-term rental with this money because I've let's say forced a lot of appreciation. There's a lot of lazy equity in that property. Okay, I'm going to switch this property up and go with a long-term rental because it's going to take less of my time because my time has value.
Now, the third part of the framework is to look at the appreciation that you've gotten in your property. And so with the properties that we buy, we are forcing appreciation. We're increasing the value of those properties. And if we have tapped into the appreciation and we don't see the property gaining much more forced appreciation, then this might be a property that we we would say, okay, we've tapped into the forced appreciation. There's not much left to go. So this might be a good opportunity for us to sell, take advantage of the increased equity that we built up in the property.
I also think about market appreciation when I'm thinking about appreciation too. For example, at one point we bought a lot of single family homes and then the market went crazy in that market and our single family homes like really more than doubled in price. And so one of the things we were thinking about is, what's likely to happen with market appreciation with these properties? Do we think that they're going to double in price again, in the next couple of years or not? And universally we were like, yeah, these just doubled in like 2-3 years. Like that's probably not going to happen again. So do we want to harvest that lazy equity? Because now we have all this equity in these properties. We could just do a cash out refi, of course, but if we're 1031 exchanging, it's actually a lot more efficient because you get every dollar in that property and you move it into a new property. And so one of the things you want to think about not only is have you tapped all that forced appreciation, but how likely are you to have a lot of market appreciation going forward? Because if you're not and you've appreciated a ton with market appreciation already, it might be that you want to tap into that lazy equity and turn that property over sooner rather than later. And I can tell you that we sold a lot of single family homes because they had so much market appreciation, which tends to happen with single family homes. And we're just like, this is just a cycle in the market. Let's get rid of our single family homes when it's a high point in the market. We can buy more single family homes when they lose value if we go into a recession.
Yeah, just to give you a real concrete example, because I was literally looking at the numbers today. We had a duplex that we bought for $145,000. And this was a really special duplex because it had a basement that was tall ceilings. It was the same size, same footprint as the first floor. So we could actually build another 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. So originally it was a 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom duplex and so 2 bedroom and 1 bath on each side. And we could add another 2 bedrooms and 1 bath in the basement on each side. So we turned this into a total of 8 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. And so we doubled the bedroom count and the bathroom count of this property and doubled the square footage of this property. So you would have thought in terms of forced appreciation, maybe doubling. But what we did was we actually almost tripled the value. We ended up selling the property for 410,000. So this had a combination of forced appreciation and a lot of market appreciation. And so when we thought about this property, we're like, okay, we tapped into all the forced appreciation. We got a lot of great market appreciation. Is this property going to appreciate a lot more from here, in terms of market appreciation? We thought, I think we got the max value on this property. Let's take this equity and put it into a bigger property. And that's exactly what we did.
And this duplex is such a great example because it brings us to the next one, which is do we want this property in our portfolio long term? And in the case of that duplex, actually the neighborhood was starting to go down. And this was a neighborhood when we purchased a property that was heading in the right direction. But, within a few years, we had a neighbor who wasn't like keeping up their property. And we just felt like the neighborhood was not going in a great direction. And we asked ourselves, do we want to own this duplex 5 years from now? Right? Do we think the neighborhood's going to be better? Do we think that it goes along with the market appreciation to some extent? But it was a real specific question about do we want this in our portfolio 5 years from now? And the answer was not really. Not really, because number one, we're scaling up and we're going bigger, and that's more efficient, and especially is more efficient for Kenji's time with all the portfolio we have. But then also with the neighborhood kind of going in the wrong direction, it was a pretty easy decision. Like, hey, we've had this forced appreciation, we've had this market appreciation. We don't want this in our portfolio in 5 years. Let's definitely move on and trade this duplex up. Now, the next thing we think about is concentration risk. And so concentration risk happens when you have a lot of your money in one property or just a couple of properties, but it also happens when you have a lot of properties in one area. So you can imagine, let's say that you own all your properties in California, 10 square mile radius, and there's a fire, right? What happens? All of your properties get affected. If you have short term rentals and all your short term rentals are in one town in Florida and it gets hit by a hurricane, what happens? Well, you have a lot of concentration risk. And so, one other thing you want to think about, especially as you're growing your portfolio, is concentration risk. And you want to think about like, if one of my properties goes down, am I going to lose a bulk of my cash flow or am I going to be in a really tough situation? If a natural disaster happens in a specific area and all my properties are there, am I going to be greatly affected? And what that leads you to do is diversify. It leads you to diversify over multiple properties, but it also leads you to diversify geographically. And so, one of the things you want to ask yourself, especially as you're building out your portfolio, this is not a question to ask yourself when you own like, two or three doors, like probably not then. But once you have, let's say, 5 or 10 buildings, you really want to start to think about these questions of how you could survive things and say, hey, do I have a lot of concentration risk that I want to trade out this specific property because it's putting me in a weak position if something happens? And maybe I want to trade out this property and go buy in a different state or buy in a different, even a different city so that my wealth is spread out and I'm able to cash flow no matter what happens.
Now, we talked about a number of different factors that we use to help us decide when to sell property. But I think one of the most important ones is do we even have a replacement property? Do we have a property to put the money into? Because what we're doing is we're doing 1031 exchanges. We want to make sure that our wealth is growing tax deferred, and the 1031 exchange is the vehicle to do that with real estate. And so that's what we're thinking about. We're thinking, okay, if you don't have a replacement property, then maybe go find a replacement property. If you want to make sure you have a good alternative. If you don't have a good alternative, if you only have bad alternatives, then no, you don't want to sell that property and put it into a bad deal, right? So what you want to do is you want to make sure you have a really good deal to put it into. When you have that really good deal, then it makes it a lot easier to decide to sell one of your properties.
So we get this all the time. A student will come to us and say, hey, should I sell this property? It's got a cash on cash return of 7%. And we say, well, what if you had a potential deal sitting in front of you and had a cash on cash of 12%? What would you do? And for them, it's a very clear, like, hey, I'm ready to sell this property. I would love a 10% or 12% cash and cash deal. Well, then go find that alternative. And one of the things that we do sometimes is we just go find an alternative property. It's got a good potential, and we can just put up some of our properties that are, maybe towards lower performers or whatever other criteria that they meet, and we can just let one or two of them be able to sell, and then we can have that alternative. And it's actually that alternative that forces us, or not forces us, that propels us to want to sell a property in the first place. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is environment, because what we've had is bonus depreciation for many, many years. And that environment of bonus depreciation really encouraged us to sell properties because we wanted to continue to maximize our tax savings. So, what we needed to do to be able to shelter our income every single year was to be able to buy new properties. And so, what that meant was we were very, very motivated to take properties to force appreciation and then to sell those properties and move them into bigger properties because we wanted to be able to 1031 exchange up and get more bonus depreciation. So I have to say the environment actually plays a big role here, because if the environment is that there's a lot of bonus depreciation available, that's really going to encourage you to turn over properties maybe faster than you would have previously. If you're very much motivated by the tax benefits and you're an active investor, meaning you have real estate professional status, or you're using the short-term rental tax loophole, you may want to continue to buy. When you run out of money, which all of us real estate investors do, you're going to need to access the money you already have in your other properties. And so that will involve selling those properties. And what you heard also, environment, not only with bonus depreciation, what you also heard us talking about, how much things have appreciated with market appreciation. Well, you also have to think about the market cycles with real estate investing. And there may be times where you feel like things have maxed out with a market cycle and things may be tending down soon. And if you think they're trending down soon, you may want some extra cash in your portfolio. And that may motivate you to take a property that's just an okay cash on cash return, or a property where you're not sure about the neighborhood, or a property where you feel like you have a lot of concentration risk and you're like, you know what? I am in a market cycle where things are kind of maxing out. Let me sell some of these properties. Let me have some cash on hand to be able to take advantage of the recession that's coming, because that's really when I'm going to buy really great deals. And so that environment may play a role in selling as well.
Yeah, and that takes us back to that first criteria of cash flow, right? So one of the things that will help you get through those recessions, and I know this firsthand, having invested through one of the worst recessions in 2008, as long as your properties are cash flowing, then it doesn't really matter. You can hold on to those properties. You can continue to pay the mortgage and all your expenses and get through that recession, and then take advantage of the next upswing, right? And so again, when you're thinking about this, I think, yes, I definitely think, you can look at the environment, what's happening. That's a little bit of timing the market, but I
Mhm.
think that it's okay. I mean, I think if I think back to 2008, leading up to 2008, I had a number of properties that weren't cash flowing, and so I started to actually sell some of those properties as much as I could. And so I just wanted to say that yeah, environment does matter, but again, if you're as long as you're cash flowing, you can get through those.
Absolutely. So, really, what we've covered, and I want to summarize because there was a lot of information there. What we've covered is how to decide when to sell a rental property, and we covered our framework. So, cash on cash return, appreciation, how much forced appreciation, how much market appreciation have you had with that property? Do you want that property in your portfolio long term? What's the concentration risk of that property? And where does it fit into all the other properties that you have in your portfolio? How much work is that property taking you? Is it worth that work? Do you have a better option, right? Do you have a replacement property that's going to cash flow even more? And that's a really great one to jump into. And then lastly, environment, right? Environment with depreciation, environment with market cycles. Where does that weigh in? This is an art. It's not a science. What you hear is we're thinking about all these different pieces, and that's allowing us to be able to make this decision. And it's a portfolio decision, right? It's also, a personal decision, right? If one property is taking a lot of your time, maybe it's not worth it anymore. So it's you're weighing all of these factors, and ultimately, what the right decision is for you and your portfolio. And if you're not sure, go find an alternative, and then it will propel you to take action one way or another. Okay, well, hopefully that was helpful to all of you who are accidental landlords or maybe own some rental properties and are debating when to sell. If you enjoyed this episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast, make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share this with one of your friends. We'll see you next time.